Hello everybody and welcome to Monday's demo lesson. Today specifically we're looking at the line graph for academic task 1. Now for me I feel like this is a great opportunity to help you guys a bit more compared to what we were doing before Christmas. So with the old system what was happening was I was going through your essays and basically just telling you what you're doing wrong. And the assumption was that you could go back to the course, take a look at how it should be done, and correct your own mistakes. But having done it for, must be seven or 8 months, it became more and more obvious from seeing people repeating the same mistakes again and again, it became more obvious that that is not enough for you. So Chris and I developed a new system whereby we're going to focus on how to improve your mistakes, because this is going to be more beneficial for you and also far more rewarding for me to be able to give you that extra bit of help. So it means a lot for me to have this new system in place and to feel like the work that I'm doing is having a greater influence on what's happening with you guys and your scores and your development and everything else. Right, so the first chart we're looking at is this line graph. Now, some of you guys might be taken back a little bit when you see that there are 6 different categories. Perhaps you've been practicing with just 1 or 2 or 3, and to be honest, it makes absolutely no difference with regard to what you have to do yourself to answer this question. So just stick to the plan, break it down into its individual components, and follow the structure from the course, and you should have no problem. So to begin with, I'm just going to have a quick look at how to structure an academic task 1 essay. This is always the same. It doesn't matter what type of graph or map or anything that you get. You're going to have the same. Paragraph 1, you're paraphrasing the question. 2 is your overview. Now, you can have more than 2 key features, but the fact is, the more you have, the more complicated you're making things, and if you just have 2, it's easier to structure the detailed paragraphs later on. Now, there's nothing wrong with having more, but it's genuinely going to make your life a hell of a lot easier if you just get 2, and then go with that. Paragraph 3, you got your first detailed paragraph, and the last one is the second detailed paragraph. So, first, I'd just like to break down the typical mistakes that I've seen over the last few months and from the last few years of my experience in teaching IELTS. So typically, when paraphrasing the question, copying the question, I'm sure you all know this is a big no-no. This is going to reduce your word count and potentially reduce your score for task achievement, so you need to stay away from that as much as possible. Next up is the other end of the spectrum, where you guys are trying to use none of the words from the question. Now, not copying the question and using none of the words from the question are very different things. If you cannot think of a synonym, or if you don't know a synonym, or you're not sure about a synonym, just use the word from the question. Honestly, as long as you're not copying 3, 4, 5, 6 words together, you're not copying the question. Using some of the same words, changing the word form or anything like that is completely fine. Right, so some of you guys, it could be you've thought of a word that's kind of the same, but you're not sure if it's the same, so you just put it down and you say a little prayer, or you find that you're just hoping, hopefully, that this word is correct. You don't want to have this situation. If you're hoping, if you're praying, then go back and just take the word from the question. You're better off to make sure that you're doing it correctly instead of trying to paraphrase in a way that you're forcing yourself to make errors. If you're not sure, just go back, take the word from the question. Obviously, if you can avoid it, that's better, but don't be putting yourself in this type of situation. Inventing new words based on other words you know. So, for example, this question is about the produce in a supermarket. So you guys, from now, every now and again, I'll find that you'll have the word super can also mean wonderful. So you'll write down wonderful market as a synonym of supermarket. Now again, you're just trying to force the issue. If you don't know, that's fine. Just go with the word from the question. Using a thesaurus. So a thesaurus is fine, especially when you're practicing, before you're practicing with under exam conditions. So if you're kind of trying to improve your vocabulary and work on your structure and everything at the same time. As you get closer to the exam, you don't want to use a thesaurus. You need to be practicing just focusing on what you know and practicing working with the vocabulary you have to communicate the ideas you have to communicate. But this point with the thesaurus is basically you got direct and indirect synonyms in the thesaurus together, and you do not want to use a word that you don't know. Basically, a thesaurus is to help you remember words that you already know, and it's not a great way of learning new vocabulary or finding synonyms for this type of a thing. So just be more careful if you're using it, and if you're close to the exam date, definitely stop. Stay away from the thesaurus. Right, typical mistakes with paragraph 2 in your overview. Too much, including specific information. So this is something that happens a lot and something that takes a bit of practice, especially when you're starting. So let's take the green line here, for example. So in your overview, so it went up and went down and went up again. That there is too much information. You just want to keep it basic. Overall, it went up. Or overall, it decreased. If you're adding all the little bits from the middle into your overview, that is too much information. Too little. Again, the other end of the spectrum with too little could be that you said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 categories increased, and then you say nothing about the 6th category. You can't really ignore any of the categories. Another way would be if you said the blue line, or whatever it represents. It's not important now when you're writing your overview, just to take a step back from it. But the blue line here, if you wanted to say that throughout the entire time period, the blue line stayed as the highest category in the chart. Now, that particular vocabulary won't work. But just to give you an idea that you've used a superlative, so it remained as the highest category throughout the period. By saying that, we know that all the other categories are below it. So you've inferred information about all of those categories, but only mentioned the blue one. So that's another way that you can be inclusive of all the information without actually mentioning all of them. So superlatives, comparatives, that kind of language will help you. And the third typical mistake is being too vague. So this is rare in this group, but it does happen where people say that all the categories changed throughout the time period. That's pretty much nothing. That's as good as saying nothing. If I said that all the categories changed throughout the time period, I would be more surprised if they hadn't. Without looking at the chart, I'm expecting information to change. So just stay away from vague terms and make sure you're describing what's happening. So not too much, not too little, and make sure you're actually describing something. And the detailed paragraphs, so I'll do both of these together. They're typically the same mistakes. So not describing the key features. So what I mean by here is, if in your overview you have 2 key features, then the easiest thing to do with your detailed paragraphs is describe the first key feature in your first detailed paragraph, describe the second key feature in your second detailed paragraph. And by doing this, you have included everything because you've already written a good overview. So you've included all the information, you've described it, and again, with your coherence and cohesion score, everything is logically ordered, it's coming in the same order as we saw it in the overview, and it's just very easy for the examiner to follow it, and there's no surprises or nothing that was unexpected. Incorrect nouns. Now this is a typical one. So let's say in our chart here, the first category is tomatoes. So some people would like to say that overall tomatoes went up. To say tomatoes went up is like a kind of magic wizardry of some description where the tomatoes are flying in the sky. Again, there's much more going on than this. So let me just get my pen here. So what we have is tomatoes is obviously an important part of the name, of the noun, but also we have spoiled tomatoes. So we know that this is going to be included per week. This is a part of what's happening. So these are weekly figures for spoiled tomatoes in supermarkets in Britain. So you can't just jump to tomatoes. You need to take everything into account. Inaccurate data, and for me this is just unforgivable. You spend so much time and money preparing and getting yourself into the position where you can get the score you finally need, and here we got pairs started at 20. Inaccurate data, you say pairs started at 10. Straight away your task achievement is suffering for just something small like this. So make sure you're paying attention to the numbers and the figures, and that if this is something you're not good at, double check it, but make sure you're getting it right, because this is very important. Copying the capital letters from the chart. So here we see tomatoes, apples, pears, all starting with capital T, capital A, capital P. This is always the way the categories will be written in the exam, but you're not copying the capital letters. This is not how we write, so just use the normal conventions of punctuation in your essay. Too much detail. So again, you don't want to report, so let's say we're using tomatoes again, you don't want to give the figure for 1990, 95, 2000, 2005, 2010, that's too much. So you're just going to pick out the key points. So realistically, 1990, this year, 2030 is going to be enough, especially when we have 6 categories like that. The cohesive devices, again, just make sure you understand what they mean before you use them, and make sure you have a range of them. These are the things that you can learn in advance, both for your task 1 and task 2. So there's some things you cannot predict, but you can be pretty sure that you're going to need cohesive devices. Repetition is another problem, so it can be repetition of vocabulary. So very often we'll see the words increased and decreased used far too often. And again, this is very avoidable in task 1, because you know you're going to be 9 times out of 10, you're going to be writing an essay about a chart. So increased, decreased, went up, went down, rose, fell, all these different words that you know are very likely going to be used. So make sure you have them, make sure you know them, make sure you can spell them, and get yourself ready in advance. Another type of repetition in the detailed paragraphs is like this. From 1990 to 2018, the amount of apples that went bad increased from about 22 kilos per week to about 30 kilos per week. Meanwhile, from the beginning of the period up until now, the amount of pears becoming spoiled in British supermarkets rose from 20 kilos per week to roughly 24 kilos per week. Now, the issue here is that you have separated each category into a different sentence, and you're just doubling up on a lot of the information. So a remedy to this is just grouping your information. So here, from 1990 to 2018, the amount of apples becoming spoiled rose from 22 kilos per week to roughly 30 kilos, and the amount of apples increased from about 20 kilos to 24. So I have all the same information, all the important points are there, but I've reduced the word count from 55 words to 32 words, which is very significant when you consider the amount of information that you have to deliver, as well as limiting yourself to 150 words to basically 180 words. The shorter your essay, the more beneficial you are. The more benefits you have with regard to the time you have left over. And in this particular chart, we see that it's going up to 2030, the year 2030. So will and going to is not going to be acceptable in this essay. So you're going to have to use language for predicting. So for example, things like is predicted to, is forecast to, is projected to. This type of language is necessary. Right, so I'm going to just show you what my plan would look like for this question. So to paraphrase the question, I'm basically just run through it and see which words I'm confident with. So the chart shows will become the graph illustrates. I mean, this is just a given. They say chart, I'm going to say graph. They say graph, I'm going to say chart. They say shows, I'm going to say illustrates, and so on. So we're just going to swap these words in and out every time. The average weight would be the typical weight. Spoiled produce can be perished fruit. Weekly instead of each week. The UK for British, and projections instead of predictions. So just some synonyms that I can use, and I'll play around with that a bit more when I'm actually writing the essay. But just do that for myself, give myself an idea first. In paragraph 2, so for my overview, what I would like to do is, first of all, just to make things a bit easier, I'm going to go to 2018 and just draw a line straight up there just to make my life a little bit more easy. So here, blue line, up, red, up, green, up, okay, purple, up, blue, about the same, and orange, down. So 4 increased, 1 stable, 1 decreased. That's my first key feature there. Obviously, I'm going to have to use the names of the actual categories in my essay, but for my plan, just to give me an idea there. And then my second key feature, I'm going to focus on the other side of the chart, would be the future. So if you look down through it, again, that is about, so the blue is up, red is stable, green up, purple up slightly, that looks slightly up, and they're stable again. So orange and red, so we have the apples and the oranges are roughly stable, and the other 4 increased. So for this chart, this is just the easiest way to organize it for trying to fit everything into the limited number of words that we have to use. In the third detailed paragraph, you might think this isn't very helpful, but I'm just going to say what already happened, so between 1990 and 2018. So I'm just going to follow through on what I said was my first key feature and describe that in more detail with all the figures and the data. And the fourth paragraph would be about the future, which again is my second key feature. So when I'm giving you feedback tomorrow, I'll be able to give you more detail as to what you did right and did wrong in these particular categories, but in these particular paragraphs. But if you follow my advice from the typical mistakes, then it should be fairly okay. Okay, so that's pretty much everything I want to go through with you guys at the moment. So here is your task. As Chris described to you last Wednesday, you have 24 hours to put this in the comments underneath if you want my feedback, my individual feedback. But more importantly, tomorrow I will be giving you global feedback to how to improve the typical mistakes that you're making, what mistakes a lot of you are making, and basically how to improve on all the small little details that I wasn't able to give you in the last system. Okay, so that's all for now. Thank you very much, guys.